AI Mentors is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our podcast, AI Mentors, brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI Mentors cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career.
You're listening to AI Mentors. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Scott Taylor. Scott is known publicly as the Data Whisperer. He is also the founder of MetaMeta Consulting. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, JP. Delighted to be here.
Our pleasure. Scott, look, we've a lot to cover. So let's start with a little brief background of yourself, how you first got involved in technology, some of the roles you've held along the way, leading us up to what you're currently working on now.
Great. My life story in like a minute here. So I've been in the data business, the data side of technology, most of my career. And I came from working with these really iconic data brands, Nielsen, Dun & Bradstreet, did a consulting stint at Kantar, and really understood through all this work the value of data management, of foundational structured content, master data, metadata, reference data, that whole part of the space. And started off in a really small brand at Nielsen that I helped create that was a universal numbering system for store locations. Nielsen tracks product movement in stores, and there was a existing database that was just there to power that we began to realize could help structure and provide hierarchy, segmentation, geography definitions, unique identifiers for the entire consumer packaged goods world. And it became a standard within the space through a lot of focused effort, branding, content distribution, that sort of thing. And for me, the epiphany was having this common data that was shared throughout an entire ecosystem and watching Coke and Pepsi agree. It was just a miraculous thing. So I never looked back. After that, it was like, I always want to be in the data business.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Obviously, you've worked in some iconic businesses, as you've mentioned, and we could probably spend plenty of time talking about each of them, but to keep it to one episode, let's focus on what you do now. The title Data Whisperer is quite eye-catching, but can you give us some insight into what you're spending the majority of your time on now with MetaMeta Consulting and then your public speaking events?
I try and bring a voice to people's work around the power and value of data management. And so the way I articulate that is we help people tell their data story. The story about their data, why data is important to their organization. If they're an enterprise, we work with enterprises who are trying to get better funding, better support, better alignment, executive sponsorship, stakeholder engagement, all those things around using data and creating and supporting data. And then I also work with tech brands, software companies, data providers, other folks in the space who support that notion of data management to help them tell their data story better. Because there's a lot of people out there with great capabilities, but they don't always bring the value and the language and the approach that makes it accessible, especially to the business side. And so I'm the why, not the how. That's how I characterize it. I'm not a practitioner. I don't get my hands dirty in that. I don't know coding. I don't actually work with a lot of data directly, but I know how to talk about it. And that's a role that I think is really valuable, especially in this world of storytelling and content creation and building brands and so on. You got to be able to tell a better story about what you do. And I focus my efforts really on the data stories that people are trying to tell.
Yeah, I think it's super important to focus on that, because when people hear data storytelling, often they think about, okay, what's the data visualization tool they're using, if it's Tableau or dashboards, but it's much more complex than that. And you're working at all levels to help people understand that it's more than just how you visualize it, it's the message. So could you give us some insight or some examples of what clients seek from you and some case studies of the impact it can have through effective use of true data storytelling?
Sure. And I'd like to just back up a bit on your point about people's initial reaction to this concept of data storytelling. And most of it is, as you suggest, around kind of the analytics, the display of analytics, the use of analytics to build a narrative, the use of dashboards, and what comes out of deriving meaning from data. The way I'd like to hear the voice of data management in that at a much more declarative way. And so the way I kind of help people understand that is, most data storytelling, a story's got a plot. You know, we went from here to there, sales are up, we've got to do this. Oh, here's an insight we found. And data management brings the characters to that plot. So to play on that metaphor a little bit, what a data story tends to be about is, let's take a really simple one. Sales are up in the East. Okay, great. That's great. Sales are up. That means we've got some data and some analytics about transactions. A transaction is actually the intersection of a product and a customer. So really the characters in that story are products are being bought by customers in this geography. The products, the customers, the geographies, the relationships, the offerings that companies have and manage, that's created on the data management side. That's created in master data. That's created and documented in a business glossary. That's owned, the management of that's owned by the data governance team. So data storytellers out there, and this is my plea to them, when you're looking for the characters in your story, go to the data management side. Products, brands, offerings, assets, customers, vendors, partners, the things you make, the people you sell to and buy from, all of those piece parts are created in data management. And that's the role, I think, that data management plays in kind of classic or current data storytelling that's generally, as you mentioned, around analytics.
I think that's a really helpful piece of advice, particularly for individuals who seem to struggle with painting the full picture of the narrative outside of just what a dashboard or the analytics side. It would be great to hear of how you're providing, solutions to organizations at all levels, and some case studies where pain points that are there, and how you're helping C-suite right the way down to individual contributors make corrective changes to impact this going forward.
Well, I think there's another that's part of what a broader data story is for an organization. So you've got, as I mentioned, sort of the characters and the plot, but then there's the story of your own data. And so that is, again, the data management story. Why is data important to your organization? Talk about the data. Why should the executive leadership and the business stakeholders really support, fund, engage with this thing that we call data? Most of the time it is because they see these flashy analytics, they see the AI, they see the ML, they see all the really cool, super sexy stuff. But none of that works if you don't have good data going in. I mean, to draw back on the classic GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, I like to call it goodness in, goodness out. But I really like to elevate that whole notion to the idea of the golden rule of data. Do it unto your data as you would have it do it to you. It's a better way to think about it, I think, than just, GIGO. And people need to understand that. So before you can tell stories with your data through an analytics dashboard and so on, you need to tell stories about your data. And what I've done in terms of some work, as you suggest, is there's kind of two sets of it. I work with enterprises who are trying to get leadership to really understand the strategic value of data management. I talked to thousands of companies over my career, not all of it's at MetaMeta, but just thousands and thousands of folks over my career. And I found this trend of frustration. I'd say maybe a few of them are actually angry, but most of them are kind of frustrated because they know data is so important to their organization. They know that the cool, sexy stuff's getting all the attention, and they know that the golden rule of data is not being followed. So when they get a minute with their CEO, they get frustrated because they don't really know how to tell that story. And the hint is, when you get that moment with your leadership to present and say, here's why we need this funding, here's why it needs to be a program, not a project, here's why it's really strategic, don't do a demo. Don't Show them your reference data architecture that you've spent all this time on. They don't care about that. That's boring. That's technical. Talk about the why. And the why it relates to three things that a business does most of the time with most of its effort. It's trying to grow, it's trying to improve, and it's trying to protect and mitigate risk. And I look at those three things and say, okay, data allows you to do all three of those. And master data, my favorite kind of data, the most important data for any organization, actually does all three of those at the same time. And in some really unique situations, actually literally with the same record. So it's really powerful stuff when it's well managed, when it's well governed, when it's expertly stewarded. And the notion of it escapes a lot of people. So I have one client who asked me to give them strategic mentoring for their data governance program. Perfect for me, because it's talking about it. It's laying out the value proposition. It's building a consensus within that group and a narrative within that group that they can then share. It's working on the elevator pitch, the kind of story you tell about your data in business is a pitch, right? You're trying to drive action and get somebody to commit to something. And that kind of story is not a fairy tale. It's not a tragedy. It's not an epic. It's a pitch. So, working on those kind of techniques. And on the brand side, on kind of the tech brand side, probably the best example of my work is what I did at Dun & Bradstreet, who has as their second biggest business what they do in master data. People are familiar with D&B. They know the DUNS number, a unique identifier. They have this thing called linkage, which I actually help them talk about in a more accessible way. It's called hierarchy everywhere else. They've got segmentation, but they got these basic foundational elements for companies in their database. Second biggest business, it's absolutely master data by definition, yet the term master data wasn't even on the website. So for me, it was an exercise to literally come in and shift the terminology, the narrative and the story that this company was telling about its data. And I can tell plenty of stories about how that was done. And it was crazy time. It was amazing and ridiculous every day. But when we finally honed it down, it got to a point where people could start to accept it and realize, oh, this is part of what we do, and articulate it in a way that the clients and the business and the market understood. Because when I got there early on, I had one of their largest clients turn to me who understood master data, understood that I understood it, and said to me, I know why I'm buying it, but they don't know why they're selling it to me. And that's not a comment you ever want to hear. And so it was really, for me, a shining moment of, we got to tell a better story here.
Helping people communicate the story is where you spend a huge amount of your time, and it's something we hear a lot, particularly in the reason why a lot of data projects fail is the inability to communicate with non-technical stakeholders why it's of value, why they should invest in it. If you were to, particularly for more junior people who maybe are not as comfortable in the public speaking forum or communicating technical content with non-technical stakeholders, what would be the key things that you'd say an individual can work on? Because we know it's possible with practice and with effort and with guidance, which is a lot of what you do. What would be a few things that you would share that people could focus on in order to be more effective when communicating the value of data?
Learn your business. You may have some techniques, you may have some practitioner activity, you may have some really fantastic data science skills, but learn your business. What does your company do? And it's impossible to learn too much about your business. So focus your efforts on helping the business, and those efforts, as I mentioned, tend to be around, okay, how are we going to help it grow, increase sales, expand, transform customer experience? How are we going to improve it? Operational efficiency. How are we going to protect it? Security, mitigate risk. Those three buckets, grow, improve, and protect, are where you're going to find the opportunities. What I hear a little bit is that people are trying to do some of this stuff for the sake of itself to show how well they do it. That's great to get the job, but if you want to do the job, focus on what your business is all about. And ways to find that are in the documents, in the presentations, in the way your company talks about itself. So a technique I use when I was selling data management. So I spent my career selling in data to organizations, generally dealing with the business side and supported by the tech side. I'd look for things like somebody's investor day presentation. So if you got an investor day presentation, if you're a public company, your leadership is put together in a very straightforward, pithy way. Here's what our company is all about, and here's where we want to go. And in that, you're going to find the clues you need to show how to link the power of data and analytics to what they're trying to do. You won't see in most of these investor day presentations, we need more data governance, or gee, I wish we could spend more on analytics. That doesn't happen. Those are enablers. And what you are trying to enable are the strategic intentions of your enterprise. So first and foremost, learn the business, learn the language of your business. What terminology do you use? Do you call it a customer? Do you call it a prospect? Do you call it a client? Do you call it an account? Do you call it a door? There's lots of different nomenclature depending on the vertical, depending on the business itself, that it uses to talk about what I would bucket as their relationships. And so when you understand the business direction, when you understand the types of relationships your business has, when you understand the offerings that you create, that's how your relationships get value from you, you've got the framework to do a lot of great stuff. And I kind of try to genericize this because it's applicable to every enterprise. But as I mentioned, sort of the terminology for those relationships, the terminologies for those off brands and offerings, the terminology for those initiatives is going to be different, but look for those types of things. And I think you'll find a lot of opportunities.
I think that's incredibly helpful. And what I'm hearing from as somebody who's non-technical is impact and ROI on whatever you work on is at the forefront of everything that you do. And it usually falls into one of three areas, which is save cost, increase revenue, improve products or services. So anything you speak about should tie to one of those three things. If it's not, chances are it may not resonate with the people listening. So I think that's a great piece of guidance.
Yeah, chances are you're doing something that your business doesn't care about. I mean, if you're not trying to grow, if you're not trying to improve, you're not trying to kind of protect your business, then what the heck are you doing? So it's, it's not about academic exercises. There's always edge cases. There's always this little thing, experimental innovation. That's all great. I don't mean to sound anything other than supportive of all that, but those things may be, okay, let's see the art of the possible and we'll figure out what we can do with it later. That's great. That's really specialized. That's not what most of your company spends most of its time on. Taking those things, even if you are lucky to be in one of these sort of innovation, forward thinking, how do we stretch all the boundaries groups, you've got to keep in mind that stuff's going to be successful potentially in a petri dish. But if you want to operationalize it, if you want to put it into production, if you want to make it scale, then you're going to need this data management foundation, and you're going to have to understand how to connect what you have just done to the operational activity of your organization.
Data monetization, which is equally a hot topic and a trend as organizations start to look to leverage the information that they have. From your experience advising organizations, what are the three biggest inhibitors in an organization monetizing their data, and what do people need to do to get the biggest ROI?
So I'm not a data monetization expert. I learned at the knee of, Doug Laney and some of the folks who've really been iconic in the space to clarify and provide the thought leadership and direction around how to do it. But I've been in the data business and I know the value of data, and I've helped companies actually monetize their data. So just with that preamble, one thing to watch out for is just, again, the terminology. So if you think that you're at an enterprise And the reason to support data in your enterprise is because you want to monetize it. Let me give you a word of warning. Most people know the last thing about the data business, which is you might make money at it. It's a really hard business to be in. And my cautionary tale around people trying to really push data monetization is it's a different business. So if you're a manufacturer and you've got a bunch of data exhaust that might be interesting and you can quote monetize it, that's great. That's gravy. That's sprinkles. That's, stuff on top. It's also a different business. And in some cases, the people who would want that data are the ones you least want to have it because it might be very proprietary. So the pure definition of data monetization can distract people because I think, and this is my personal opinion, there's folks out there who do this much more for a living than I do, but I think making data monetization in its purest definition a key initiative at a company that doesn't have the rest of its data act together is a fool's errand. You're going to fail because people are going to think, wow, we're going to make a whole bunch of money on this stuff. Well, there's other ways to capture that value. So ways to capture the value of data, which may be a more comfortable positioning than monetization, because monetization in most people's mind means money. Why wouldn't it? So capturing that value could come in a variety of ways. A really interesting way that's happening is this notion of, okay, we got a widget. We used to sell tangible widgets, and somebody comes and buys this widget, and then when it breaks, we fix it. And when they want a new one, we sell them a new one, and we'll keep track of it. We'll keep track of the relationship. Hey, whenever you need a new widget, let us know. So there's that moving to more licensing the value that widget spins off as a service. So in a very short way, okay, how do you go from selling widgets to licensing them as a service? That takes a tremendous amount of data and analytics to do, because if you think about jet engines, windmills, there's a lot of really great examples out there. The idea that people are not buying and selling jet engines anymore, they're licensing the power that comes out of it, and then that supplier is monitoring that engine with a whole bunch of data coming out of it to anticipate maintenance, preemptive activity, to measure the value they're getting out of it. These are really strategic notions and have a tremendous amount of different types of value than the old business models. So in that case, and again, it depends on the industry and what you're doing, but there's an area where I see the need for all this really well-structured, well-managed data to make that happen. And it becomes really highly strategic because you go from, okay, selling things on an episodic, project-oriented, ship when you need it kind of basis, to I'm always involved. I own this thing. You're leasing the output. And there's a lot of companies out there doing some really cool stuff in that. And again, I try and bring the voice of data management to that discussion whenever possible. Because if you're trying to build, let's say, a digital twin, you need a lot of structured data to make that twin happen.
No, I think it's great to get your perspective on it, because the title monetization, again, can be somewhat misleading, and to your point, it can be a fool's errand. Scott, you spend the majority of your time now really speaking about the story behind the data, and it would be good to get your perspective on how you came to this point and what you love most about your current role and what you're doing.
Sure. One of the things I love most is exactly what we're doing now, talking about it. I just love that. So, until the whole pandemic showed up, I was out there on a pretty robust public speaking tour. You could still do that. I'm working on how to create that experience virtually and so on. But I love talking about this stuff, and I love getting people excited about it. Nothing thrills me more than walking into a room with that's filled with two kinds of people, really. The folks who get it and go, wow, this guy really tells it great. I wish my boss was here. That's a comment I get a lot. I wish my stakeholders were here to hear this because you can really make this sing. And then also the folks who didn't understand it, and they go from, I have no idea what you're talking about, to, wow, how can we live without this? Now I understand the importance of it. And that for me is the real thrill, getting people to think differently about something, either because they really understand it and I brought a different perspective, or because they didn't understand it and now they do. And a really concrete example of it, going back to my D&B days, when I put the master data story together for them and brought it out on the road, I had two comments that I got from people at two ends of a spectrum that really just validated my work. One was somebody who'd been there for 30 years and said, that's one of the best presentations of the core of what we do I've ever heard. And then a summer intern who'd been there a month who said, you know what? Now I understand what the company does. Same presentation. So that's what I love to do. And so any form of that, content, white papers, blogs, podcasts, presentations, helping people with their stories. I do puppet shows. If you haven't seen them, I will put a link in your description there. I've got a group of the puppets of data that use all these kind of buzzwords and start jibber jabbering with each other and forget about the data. That's one of my most popular pieces out there. So I just love finding the creative ways to bring this really valuable stuff to life, because it needs the help.
Scott, thank you so much. I think you obviously have a massive following, but I think for people hearing you for the first time will be encouraged to follow you some more, because it's truly unique content, great speaking, and I think we can all learn a lot from what you've got to tell. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, JP. Yeah, if anyone wants to follow me, find me on LinkedIn, Scott Taylor, The Data Whisperer. I'm starting to show up organically on searches pretty nicely. I got a ton of stuff on YouTube. Hopefully this helps tell your AI story, your data story in any way. But JP, thank you so much. I love sharing these kinds of things.
Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.